Thank you for joining us today on the Backstory Podcast, Season 2. If you enjoy this podcast, please follow it, and we always appreciate your ratings and reviews. Today is a guest that I am personally such a huge fan of, and this is somebody where you may not know his name yet. I hope you do, but if you don't, one day you will. And so this is particularly exciting for me. I would love to introduce you to Moses Ose Utomi. Welcome to the podcast, Moses.
Thank you so much for having me. That's a very nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, that was the informal. This is the formal introduction so that our readers can get to know a little bit about you. So Moses Ose Utomi wrote his first book when he was 5. It was a book about warrior bunnies from Mars, and the only copy in existence is owned by his mother. Since then, he has gone on to write many more slightly better stories. He primarily writes fantasy, quote, but with the plot and pacing of a psychological thriller. And his fiction often grows out of the West African culture and mythology he was raised in as a Nigerian-American. Moses holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in fiction writing, as well as a certificate in book publishing, and he has short fiction in various publications. Most notably, Moses is the author of the young adult fantasy novels Daughter of Oduma and The Forever Desert, a trilogy of fantasy novellas that begins with The Lies of the Ajungo. Moses is also a martial arts, karaoke, and obscure sports addict. So Moses, now that we have just this basics of you and your accomplishments and the variety of your background, your backstory talked about coming to see that our identities aren't fixed, that may change according to the context. Can you talk a little bit about that more, about that change and the fluidity of that?
Yeah, I think some of that is pretty intuitive, right? I think people grow older. People are different around their parents versus their friends versus their church versus their, whatever. And so some of that is intuitive. But I think for me in my early 20s, traveling for the first time and being in very different cultures, it was kind of mind-blowing to realize that so many things that I thought I had a pretty clear grasp of and pretty clear understanding of, I had only begun to explore. There were so many more layers and levels by seeing it through the eyes of people who were from very different from me. In some ways very similar, but in some ways had very different perspectives on things. When different aspects of myself meant something different, I had to reckon with that. I had to come to either agree, like, oh, that's a useful way of looking at myself, let me adopt that. Sometimes I would have to disagree and say, that's not, how I want to see myself. I should reject that. But the process itself of coming to try to understand oneself in different contexts, I find is very valuable, very meaningful.
I like what you said, Moses, about I chose to reject that. Like, that's not how I want to see myself. Do you consider that like an active sort of a decision that you made, a conscious choice to say, nope, that's not me?
In some cases, yeah. I think it has to be deliberate. I think with humility, I think there's initially a process of, what if that is me? What if that's who I am or who I've been? I think that's an important step to consider. And then a decision of, but if I don't want that to be me, I need to maybe make changes, or I need to think of myself differently. And so, I was a young American man traveling abroad in a developing country. I think there's a lot of potential negative stereotypes that come along with that. There's a lot of potential exploitation that comes with being a person from, a Western country or more developed country traveling to a developing one. And so, yeah, I had to think, well, there are certain assumptions about who I am. Are those accurate? Some of them might have been. And I think, I have to understand that and accept that before I can make a conscious act of saying, well, I don't want that to be part of who I am, and then changing that.
Yeah. Did you come out of that experience and thinking about the people that you met there, that you gained relationships and friendships with? Did you come out of that with this idea that you were more alike than different, or that you were more different than alike?
It's a fantastic question. I'll say more alike than different, but even that is complicated. I think there's human beings are a beautiful thing. And I think it did help me understand humanity more. It's very easy to know 5 people and think you understand humans. You know what I mean? But of course, there's more than that. And so the more of humanity I get to see, the more I can appreciate what that means and what it is. And so getting to see people from the different side of the world, people who did not have any common cultural reference. We could not talk about a common TV show we liked, common bands we liked. You know, of course, there are a lot of people who we could, but I would meet some people who really had no frame of reference from my experience and vice versa. And so all that's left is your shared humanity. That's the only thing you have to connect with somebody over. And so that is where I found that there's so many things that you would never expect in other people, that you're like, oh, this is just human. This isn't me. This isn't America. This isn't Black. This isn't my culture. This is a human thing. That was beautiful. At the same time, yeah, you see that there's humanity is a big thing, which includes the similarities and also includes the differences. There's things that you would never imagine that, like, oh yeah, I guess that's a human thing too. There's people who live that way or think that way or operate that way.
Beautifully said. All right, so let's go back. Let's go back. Well, let's not go too far back. Let's just start with, who are you? If you were to describe yourself with who you are now, who is Moses Ose Utomi?
Oh man. At this stage of my life, I'm mostly an uncle, to be honest. I have 3 nieces, brand new niece and a nephew. And I think the way they see me is how I'm starting to see myself. I think of myself as Uncle Momo more than I would like to admit. Yeah, I think I'm at a stage in my life where I feel like I feel confident that I have something to offer. And I don't mean that in like a weird, depressing way when I was younger, but I think when you're a young person coming up, you try to figure out like, yeah, what am I going to add to this tapestry of Earth? You know, how am I going to add something to the story of humanity? And I think I'm in a place now as a storyteller and as a person where I'm able to see that. I can see how I can, you know, I've spent a lot of years teaching, and I see how I can add things to the lives of people, especially young people, in terms of guidance, in terms of love, in terms of understanding. I think that's the aspects of myself that I'm most interested in exploring and manifesting now is somebody who is very interested in those around them and wants to care for them and offer something to his communities and to his family and to his friends.
Wow. I always think you referenced being an educator. I think there are 2 types of educators. I think there are people who teach, and I think there are teachers. Who are you?
I think I'm a teacher. I don't know. It depends on how you define it. Because it sounds like I think you've thought about this a lot more than I have. Because I think that's a really good way of characterizing it.
Your gut reaction is critical. Like, how do you see yourself? Is it your job or is it your part of your identity? Right.
Yeah. And I do think it's part of my identity. I think teaching to me isn't like, I mean, if anybody who's a teacher knows, it's not always fun. You know, if you're doing it purely for fun or doing it purely for money, or, you know, I think that's a kind of a crazy reason to do it. I don't think for me, it's not that. But it is extremely fulfilling. It is extremely gratifying. It is extremely useful to other people when, whether it's in the classroom or outside of the classroom. I think part of the reason I write books is to teach, whether teaching myself, you know, I think a first draft or a couple first drafts, often teaching myself something. And then after that, hopefully teaching other people something I've learned, some insight I've gleaned, and I hope it can be valuable to them. So yeah, whether it's in the classroom or out of it, I'm a teacher.
Then you are. Do you have any students that you will always remember?
Oh my gosh, so many. So I actually met with a student this last weekend. I lived in China after Thailand, and I had a student who he was 10 at the time, and time flies, and now he's 18, and he's studying at UCI, at University of California, Irvine. And he reached out and he said, "Remember me?" And I said, "Of course." And we met up, and it was wild. He's bigger than me now, which is crazy because he was a little 10-year-old boy last time I saw him. But yeah, that's Nick. Nick he was, even at the age of 10, he stood out as being extremely curious and extremely sharp-minded. And I think it's inspiring when you see young people who are so capable and insatiable. I do think it's something, you know, as an adult, like I think a lot about fireworks and the concept of it and how they've become kind of plain to me because I've seen every year, my whole life I've seen it. And then you look at a child see fireworks and it's literal magic to them. And I think it reminds you of how much beauty and magic there is in the world. And so my students, my whole life, have always done that for me. They've always reminded me of the beauty of whatever I'm teaching them, of writing, of language, of interaction, of the English language in particular. It's always something that sticks with me.
Absolutely. So, all right, if we dial it back then, now you're teaching young people. What kind of a student were you?
I was terrible. I was insufferable, probably. Yeah. I think I knew I was smart, and I think that's not always good in a kid. I think humility is a very valuable thing that I've learned. But as a kid, I think I knew I was very hungry for knowledge, and I knew I was pretty good at acquiring it. And so I was one of those kids that if I wasn't learning what I felt I should be learning, I tuned out. I did my own thing, which as a kid felt fine. I was like, look, I'm not bothering you. I'm just kind of hanging out, I'm reading what I want, whether it's comic books or a textbook about something unrelated, or I'm drawing pictures. I was doing independent study when I should have been in class for probably the first 15 years of my education. As a teacher, on the other end, yeah, those students drive me nuts. I can empathize with them because I was that student, but now I see the error of my ways. Yeah.
Was it an error, or were you taking care of what your brain needed at that time?
That's a good way to put it. There were some teachers I had over the years that I think they got it. They understood where I was at, and they understood what I needed, and they didn't, through a combination of their experience and their wisdom and their lack of ego, they were able to understand it wasn't personal. My brain worked the way it worked, and they were able to foster that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So were you a reader then?
Big time. That's mostly what I did. Yeah.
What were you reading?
Everything. My parents have a story of picking me up from preschool. They were called by the teacher to pick me up. I was 3, I think. And the teacher wanted to meet with them after school, after they came to pick me up. And my parents said, okay, sure. And they came. They said, why? What's going on? They said, well, Moses isn't paying attention in class. And they said, oh, no, what's he doing? They said, he's reading the newspaper. So I guess I'd been stealing the newspaper every morning from our porch and taking it to school and just reading the newspaper in preschool, when I should have been probably finger painting or do music or talking or recess or whatever else I should have been doing. And so they asked, my parents asked, what is he reading, or is he looking at pictures? And they said, no, he's reading. He's reading. We've asked him questions about it. I don't remember this. I was pretty young, but yeah, reading I was built for it. I think it came very early to me and very naturally.
Did you teach yourself to read? Were you taught that early?
A little bit, I think. Yeah, some of it was parental guidance. My mom was a librarian. We had books all around the house. She was very interested in our literacy. And I think I kind of took the lesson she taught me and ran with it pretty early. Yeah.
Ah, great mom.
Yeah.
All right. You were also writing at a very young age. Warrior Bunnies from Mars.
Yeah.
Moses, I don't know why the whole world doesn't have this story already, because that is just genius.
Thank you. Yeah. The illustrations probably are the reason it's not published, in addition to the writing. But other than that.
All right. Well, so did you continue to write, or was that kind of just a one-off sort of experience?
No, I was obsessed. I mean, I think, because I think I was reading so early, I was like, okay, well, how do you do that? I'd read these books and say, cool, how do I do that? How do I put together Very Hungry Caterpillar? How do I put together, these things? And so, from 5, I mean, I was writing, I was big into sports as a kid and still am. So I started writing sports related stories and fiction all throughout elementary and middle school. By middle school, high school, I started to really read fantasy. My brothers exposed me to epic fantasy when I was 12. And so that became, what I wanted to write. I would draw maps of all these fictional worlds, and I'd have whole notebooks full of things about the different races who lived here and the different economics and all these things. Yeah, I spent a lot of my teenage years being a nerd.
How did those books impact you? I mean, if you're absorbing them that much, how did they change who you are or impact you?
I think there's a quote from, I think it's George R. R. Martin. I don't remember the exact quote, but the sentiment was, you only get one life, but reading allows you to get many more than that. And I think that's kind of how it impacted me, is that I would get so absorbed in books. I mean, really, when my parents wanted to punish me, there was nothing they could do except take my books. Nothing else worked. They did a lot. They got very creative, and the only thing that mattered to me was because it felt like a different life to me. I could just go into these books and I'm living that life for 300 pages, 400 pages. And so, it made me, one, realize how much I loved it, how much I loved these experiences, and how much it made my actual life feel more full. And 2, I think made me realize the power of creating something like that, that I could get so lost and absorbed in something that someone else had just made. And even then, I don't think I fully understood that someone else had made it. You know what I mean? I think it takes time I realized that there's other people like me writing these books, as opposed to just divine texts falling down from the sky for me to consume. But yeah, and I wanted to make it.
Do you think there's any link between your desire to travel when you got into your early 20s and all of these worlds you had traveled in your teens?
That's a very astute observation. I think there definitely is. Yeah. I'm a very curious person. I hate not knowing things and not experiencing things. And when I was a kid, I couldn't book a flight. So I had to read books. And then as I grew up and I was able to triathletes that this is a natural kind of extension of that desire to know and to learn and to experience.
Yeah. All right. So I assume you have since referenced China and of course Thailand. Is there any specific memories of anywhere you've ever been that you see as turning points just in your life in general? Just like that was a turning point moment or place for me.
Yeah. I mean, so many, to be honest, a lot of them, but one that stands out. So I do martial arts. I've done martial arts off and on for a lot of my life. And when I was in China, I had this really tumultuous, maybe like 6 month, 4 month period where I had gotten really sick. And I'd lost I'm a thin guy. You can't really, I don't know if you could tell from the video, but I'm a pretty thin guy in general. And at that time I had lost like 20 to 30 pounds, which I did not have to lose. I was really sick. I got some like stomach bug and I was in bad shape. I was hospitalized at one point. And then about 3.5 to 4 months later, I was in training for like a fight and I was taking it very seriously. And you have to be in pretty good physical condition for that. And I ended up, I didn't know it was a tournament. I thought it was one fight. There was some language barrier stuff. But the next thing I knew, it was a tournament I was in a foreign country, surrounded by people who didn't know me or speak English. There were no friends or family there with me. It was very nerve-wracking, but I did it. I competed. I won. And it was this 4-month turnaround of like sickly in the hospital, really frail person to the best shape I've ever been in my life, competing for something that means a lot to me. And I think it, over the course of any individual fight, whether it's in a ring or outside of it, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn where your limits are. And when you're being pushed to your brink, you start to have conversations with yourself that are really important. And there are moments in those fights where I really thought I had about reached my limit. And so when I realized I was able to push through those, it gave me a lot of self-confidence, a lot of reassurance that if my back is to the wall or if I feel like I'm incapable, I will probably find a way. And I think that self-assurance is something that carries me constantly through my writing career. I think as a writer, you know how it is. There's so much self-doubt and there's so many moments where you're convinced that you're like, this book's not going to work. I'm actually not even that talented. There's so many reasons this isn't going to work out. And that was a turning point in my life where I realized like, no, I'm, whether it's because I'm the kind of person or because I have the kind of support system, whatever it is, when I'm able to get things done when I really, really, am pushed against the wall.
There is so much here in that one answer I want to unpack. Let's start with, how did you get involved with martial arts? How did that begin for you?
Like most things for me, my older brothers were such a big influence on me. They were big into martial arts when they were younger. And so they tried to introduce me to it when I was very, very young, but I was such a whiny kid. I couldn't do it. I cried and ran out the dojo first time I did karate. But I came back to it in my early teens, and then it made more sense to me and I loved it a lot. And so I studied a few different martial arts. Jeet Kune Do was the main one. And then as I got older, I did some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then I ended up doing kickboxing in my mid to late 20s.
Competitive?
Briefly, yeah. That was. I mean, my entire competitive history was in China for kickboxing. I did compete a little in Jiu-Jitsu in the States.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so as you were training, what did that add into your life? You talked about this, like the ability to dig deeper, right? Did that come from martial arts? Did it come from somewhere else?
I'm sure it came from parenting and life and other things. I think sometimes, though, aspects of yourself you don't see until that's what crucibles are all about. You don't see until you're put in a moment to reflect that aspect of yourself. And so I'm sure it was always in there. I think martial arts is what alerted me to it. It let me know what I was capable of. Training for a fight is very difficult and extensive, and it requires a lot of focus and consistency more than anything, which I think all of that applies to writing. If you can't write a novel in a night, you can't write it in a week realistically. And even the month is ambitious. Like, you have to be consistent over a long period of time. And that's very much reflected in martial arts.
So do those two pair for you then? The skills that you use in one setting, same skills for you?
Very similar, yeah. I think it's the same psychological skills, yes, of how to talk to yourself and how to both forgive and motivate yourself. I think it's very similar. I was a big old Bruce Lee nerd when I was a kid, and he was both a martial artist and a writer. He had a philosophy degree, and he wrote a lot of, wrote books and had thoughts. So I think that pairing has always existed for me.
I want to reference one other thing you just said, which is the ability to forgive yourself. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think human beings are, and I try to reflect this in my writing, we're very fragile things. We're like just meat sacks. We're just flesh robots. You know, we're just trying to navigate this very, very difficult world and this very difficult life. And so, you know, we all have limitations. And I think as a writer, as a martial artist, as a person, as an uncle, as a son, as a brother, as a friend, your limitations are who you are at that moment. And I think it's okay. It's okay. You know, we're not supposed to be anything more than that. We're just people. And I think that's an important thing to tell myself when I'm 3 months past deadline on a book, or when I'm unable to do something. You know, I just let myself know it's, you know, it's okay. It's okay. You'll get there with patience and with effort. You'll get there, but it's okay that you're not exactly who you need to be all the time.
Wow. You said that you wrote a book while in Thailand that has never been published, and you don't think it will be. Do you know why it will never be published? Do you know where it falls short? Or is it just never was meant for that?
I think that was in China. Maybe I misspoke. That was in China. Okay. Yeah. I'd written a book that I think I'm probably a better enough writer now that I wouldn't want it to be published, you know, or I would have to rewrite it substantially to get it published. I think I'll probably make a lot of tweaks. I think some of the ideas were ill-considered and probably not as marketable now as I thought they were then. They might not have been then, but yeah.
Okay. So your debut novel, Daughters of Oduma, it is so powerful and empowering as well. What was your publishing journey like for this book?
I was pretty spoiled. But I mean, it took some effort, but I think I got lucky because I know publishing is a beast. I've heard so many stories of what it can be like. I had just written the book that will never sell. I had finished that book and it hadn't gone to market. And so I thought to myself, what if I only get to write one book left? Like, what do I want to say? What do I want it to be? How do I represent myself in a way that's true and fair? And so that's where Daughters of Oduma was born. It combines all the things I love, martial arts and West African culture and the sense of family and all these things. And I sped through the first draft. I wrote it very quickly, quicker than I've ever written anything. I think it was like 2 months for the first draft. And then I went back and I started building it out from there. And then once I had it to a place where I thought this is done, you know, this version of it is done, I reached out to agents. And my number one agent was Jim McCarthy, who's a Distill Goddard. He's brilliant. I think he represents a lot of authors who I really respect. And so I reached out to him. He was in my first round of agents and he offered on it. He offered on it. So it went way smoother than my previous querying process. It went way smoother than I imagined it would. And he's been a fantastic agent since. And he got it into an editor's hands pretty quickly and they offered on it pretty quickly. And yeah, it was all very, very fortunate.
Yeah, well, fortunate, but also you earned it. Of course, you know, I always think we're very careful always to discount what is actually a really meaningful achievement. So no, you earned all of that in. All right, you describe yourself and you are Nigerian-American and you own that identity. What is it like for you to keep a foot in both of those places? That West African identity part of yourself, the American identity part of yourself. How do you experience that?
Yeah, you know, I'm rebellious by nature. I think that's part of why I would read in class. Part of it was I like to read. Part of it was I like to not do what I'm being told to do. And so I find that culturally I'm the same way. I think I am inclined to rebel against certain aspects of American culture, inclined to rebel against certain aspects of Nigerian culture, to where the desire to, the ability to have footholds in both becomes, I have to be very deliberate about it. Because it's very natural for me to push away and to go to literally fly to a different continent and start to learn their culture. And so I have to be very deliberate about talking to my parents about our culture and engaging with it and reading books about it and being around other Nigerians, because I know that I am always going to be making decisions about what aspects I want to internalize and adopt and embody, instead of just kind of like letting it all sift through me and just accepting it. So I'm, within Nigerian culture, there's a lot of subcultures, a lot of tribes. So I specifically try to invest in the history and the understanding of my tribal culture. We're called the Isan tribe in southern Nigeria. And, we have our own very deep, complex history and practices and things. And so, especially as we get older, and as, I realize that as I think we all realize at some point, someday you wake up and you're the elder, you know? There's a time where you can look to your parents and other people, and there's a time when that's when people start looking to you. And as I rapidly approach that, I try to be very deliberate about understanding what that means.
This tribe that is your heritage, that is part of who you are, what do you particularly love that you have brought into your present life?
I'm sure this applies to a lot of other people, and it's fine, but I think there's a lot of pride associated with who we are. Our tribe was formed. We were very self-determined. You know, we have forged our own space in Nigeria. We forged our own history, and we have relations with other tribes, of course, nearby tribes, but we are our own people. We speak our own language. We have our own practices, and some of them are really beautiful and distinct. We have our own style of dance, and it's who we are, and those things will always persist.
So when you talk about your rebellious nature and your independent thought and all of these, I can see how that runs very, very deep for you, even into just heritage, that it's ingrained in you from generations.
Right.
All right, then your name, Moses Ose Utomi, your middle name. Can you talk about that, why you use that as part of your author name and how that attaches to your identity?
Yeah, it was a very deliberate choice. I think I'm a first generation kid. I grew up in America, obviously, and a lot of the goal of being first generation is to assimilate, is to not stand out. And so I think the name Moses Utomi, you know, it stands out a bit. It is clearly not an American name, but Moses is something, it's a name most people recognize. I remember, I think in like 8th grade, I had a friend who had never heard the name Moses, and I was blown away. It's like, I've never experienced this. Everybody's heard this name. And it allowed me to kind of pass as American. And then, you know, as I got older and as I started my writing career, I realized that my experience as Nigerian-American and the experiences of my family are essential to who I am, and they're essential to my storytelling. And so I don't want people to just look at my name and think he's American, or he's Jewish, which a lot of people think with Moses, or he's Japanese, which they think with Utomi. I wanted them to be able to look at my name and know I'm Nigerian, not just for Americans, but also for other Nigerians. I think I've received a lot of really kind messages from other Nigerians who say that they didn't know how to go about becoming a writer, or they didn't know if there was space for Nigerian writers or Nigerian-American writers. And so them being able to see my name and see that I have some connection to them means a lot to me. And that was a very important part of me, you know, adding my middle name to my writing name.
Oh, I love that. Moses, for you, where does story come from? Where does it begin?
Empathy. And I think it kind of touches back on what I said earlier about perspective. I think the understanding that you need to share your experiences with someone else, right? If there was no need to do that, we wouldn't need to have stories. We could all just live our lives. But I think when you realize that other people are not you and you are not other people, but we need to understand each other. And to me, that's what a story is me living my life or someone else living theirs, and then us coming together and saying, your experiences are important to me. Please convey them to me in the best way you're able, and I'll do the same.
I think empathy, that ability to help our readers identify with somebody who may have a different worldview or may come from a different place or may have a different appearance. I think that is the most critical reason why it's so important we get people to read. You know, we have a country fracturing.
Absolutely.
And I think empathy is what will save it. So really, truly, you couldn't have given a better answer. All right. Do you plot your novels or do you discover them as they flow?
Yes, is the answer. I mean, it's a bit of both. I grew up reading the great plotters, the architects, George R. R. Martin, Robert Jordan. They have these 12-book tomes, you know, series that you got to really have everything worked out. So I always wanted to be that. But I'm not quite that extensive of an architect. I think I have to have a general image or feeling or often quandary that I need to resolve. That's kind of the impetus for the project. After that, every project looks a little different. Some require more outlining than others. Some I will literally draw. I'll try to visualize. I had to doubt Liza Diojingo to work out some of the logic of that book. Some I'll have 4 different Excel sheets or Word documents, but I I never am so granular that I've lost the process of discovery while writing, especially when I get to my characters. They do whatever they want. So and however much I plan, once I start writing, they'll start whispering in my ear that they want to go a different direction. I got to follow that. So.
And do you follow that?
Most of the time. They're pretty smart. Yeah, every now and then they're saying something crazy and I'm like, I can't do that for you. But most of the time, when a character's voice or motivation starts to break through to me, I think I'll follow it. And then it's my job to make it work, I feel like, despite what they've given me.
Yeah. Yeah, characters are very active things. We have no control
really
over them. Do you know your ending then?
I know how I want the book to feel. I know how I want the reader to feel when they finish the book. I typically don't know what that will look like in terms of plot, in terms of what will actually happen to induce that feeling. And it's not the last scene that does that anyway, right? It's the flow, the whole course of the book. So yeah, I know the ending emotion, but I don't always know the ending events.
When you write, are you fast or are you slow and methodical? Like for you, what's the average time for writing?
I think I'm slow. I'm fast in moments of writing. I'm slow in between. So I think when I sit down to write, I can put out a decent amount. I can put out in a good hour session, I'll get 700 to 1,000 words. Some, 1,000, 1,100 on the high end, 500 to 700 on the lower end. So I think that's a decent speed. I think that's pretty solid. I think though that when I sit down to write, I only sit down to write when I feel like I have something to say is part of it. And so I spend a lot of time talking to myself in the shower, going on long drives, going on walks in the gym where I need to work out what I want to say so that when I do sit down, I have, it's all coming out. I'm not staring at the blank page.
You mentioned hearing from other Nigerians, and I'm sure other people from all backgrounds on your writing. Have there been any particularly memorable fan moments?
There was one. There was a Nigerian who had reached out on Twitter, and he said that, I think for me, growing up especially, there was kind of a struggle. Like I said, I'm very rebellious. And so there were times where I felt more disconnected from Nigerian culture, where I felt like I'm not really Nigerian, I'm more American, especially when things get complicated. And so having somebody from Nigeria reach out and say, I read The Lies of the Ajungo, and this is exactly what I feel like I've been living. That meant a lot, because I grew up across the ocean. I grew up with different influences. I watched different television. I listened to different music. And so I've always felt that there's still something in me that connects us. But that kind of external validation that this other guy who was only a few years younger than me, had read my work and felt it was authentic. That to me meant a lot. It meant that connection that I've always known was there, that sometimes I doubt or I worry isn't as strong as it could be, was enough.
You mentioned this one, Lies of the Ajungo.
Yeah.
Which is literally one of my all-time favorite books.
Oh my gosh.
And would you just honor us enough to read a little bit about this? Because I want listeners to understand why I love this book so very much.
Oh, thank you. I have a copy here, and I can read. Do you want me to read the intro, the first paragraph? How far you want?
Yeah, maybe just a few of the opening paragraphs as far as it seems right to you to do.
Okay. I think I see. Awesome. Okay. All right. So this is the very beginning of The Lies of the Ajungo. There is no water in the city of lies. There hasn't been for as long as any can remember. The great mamas tell stories about the fever when not a single cloud was seen for years, and even the cacti puckered and died. Breezes became natural disasters, stirring up enough fine, choked sand to blind the city for days. Mamas drank the blood of their children to fend off thirst, only to die anyway. Too late they learned that blood was no substitute. To the north, the Ajungo Empire had water like sky. They drank their fill, bathed daily, planted seeds and watched them grow into trees fat with fruit. Orulu, Oba of the city of lies, pleaded with the Ajungo for aid, but the Ajungo were sworn to selfishness. In exchange for water, the Ajungo demanded the tongues of every citizen of the city of lies. It was a twofold price, a price of blood and a price of history. An untongued people cannot tell their story. Stop there.
And that exact line, an untongued people cannot tell their story, is when you had me hooked. Well, sooner than that, if I'm being honest, but at that point, you had me. It is beautiful writing and so rich with imagery, and yet there's this immediate tension. You just got straight into there's the problem. So it was doing everything right.
Thank you.
For those who are listening who are aspiring writers, younger or older, what would your advice to them be?
I would say, it's so cliche. I wish I had a cooler thing, something that was more novel, but don't give up. Don't give up and believe in yourself. I know it sounds awful. As the young me was so cynical to be like, ugh, this guy's too Disney for me. But really, I do think that's what it takes. Is writing is, I mean, there's a reason most of your favorite writers are older people. Writing is thinking. Writing is emoting. Writing is problem solving. Writing isn't something that comes intuitively for a lot of people. It's something you work at. It's a learning to express yourself, which is something we all learn over the course of our lives. There's 80-year-olds who are still working on expressing themselves. This is a lifelong project. So write as much as you can, read as much as you can, be patient with yourself, and believe in yourself. Know that there will be fruit to your labor. It just takes time.
I don't think that's cliche at all. I think that's exactly what we need to keep repeating, and not only to aspiring writers, to each other and to ourselves.
Right.
All right, coming this summer, can you tell us about your new release? The cover of it is beyond gorgeous. So,
thanks.
Yes, can you tell us all about your new release?
I have 2 releases this year.
Both of them.
I know. This is a busy year. So the first one coming out next month, March 25th. I have the sequel to Daughters of Odu. It's called The Children of Ose. And that one, that's my young adult series. And that one is without spoiling the first, it's about this world where these young girls live in tribes and they compete in this kind of magical wrestling, divine fantasy competition. And they live on this island. And there are no adults on this island, it's only kids. And in the first book, we learn a lot about the protagonist and her power and what she's capable of. And in the second book, a man shows up, a fully grown man. And so it's about these tribe of super powerful core wrestlers reckoning with a deep, drastic change in their reality and what that means, what that might look like. And then in the summer, in August, I have the conclusion to my novella trilogy, The Memory of the Ogisi, comes out. And that's spoilerific. I don't want to say too much about it, but each book in this series takes place 500 years after the last. And so, as we see the protagonists go through a book and learn the lessons they learn, we jump forward 500 years and we get to see the impacts of what the things they learned and how history has kind of potentially changed or potentially distorted what they learned and what they communicated. And so by the third book, we are now 1,000 years after the events of the first book. And the events of the first book have now moved from present into past, into history, into mythology. And I think it has hopefully a cool effect that readers will love.
I think that is just conceptually, that is just fascinating to me. How can readers learn more about you?
I'm all over the internet. You can look at my website, MosesOse Utomi.com. Or you can read the works. I try to stay up to date on my social media, especially Instagram. Whenever I have a short story come out or a book coming out, there's always something.
And I'm going to just add to that, if Moses's name is on the cover, just buy it and read it. That will tell you everything that you want to know about this man.
Oh, thank
But
you.
Moses, I'm going to ask you one final question. It's going to be a tough one. And so it's okay if you need to take just a moment to think about it. What is something that you have never been asked or that you weren't asked here that you would really love to express to our listeners?
Oh, no. Oh, that is a tough one.
Something that you just think needs to be said or understood.
I've never been asked, because I think most people assume they know it before so they don't ask. But what are the themes? What's the main theme of the Lies of the Ajingo? I think most people just kind of, you get it. It's not a textbook. It's pretty clear in the message to some extent. And I do defer to the reader when it comes to understanding texts. I wrote it. That doesn't mean I understand it. It's your job to understand it and feel it and to experience it in a way that I can't. I was the creator. Whatever the reader's experience is important. But if I were asked, what is the biggest takeaway from the book? I would say empathy. I think it's very easy to think the book is about revolution or propaganda and how it's used. There's a lot of things that are going on in the book, but I think the main takeaway from this book and from anything I write is to understand that other people are living just as much a complex life as you are. And goal of life, of being here with each other, is to understand each other, appreciate each other for what we are, And I think that is really the takeaway from the first book, is that people who are different from you, people who don't look like you, people who you've been told are terrible and mean and dangerous, they're people just like you. And we gotta take care of each other.
Wow. Sounds like you are a very empathetic person yourself, to be able to express that. You consider yourself that?
I try. It's something to work on always. Yeah.
I heard something once that I thought was really fascinating, and it said, just remember that when you meet somebody, that you are a background character in their life story, and that like we always were so self-centered, right? Of thinking of our lives and stuff, but you meet somebody and you are just a side character in the story that they have going on.
Yeah. So be a good one.
Be a good one. Yeah,
Right.
make sure it's a good moment. Moses, I cannot thank you enough for your time and for your generosity in giving us this interview. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So, as you all know, everyone has a backstory. It is the life that happens to us before we begin happening to life. It will mold you and form you into this amazing person you are, which means your story will always be important. So go out there, tell your story. So the Backstory podcast, it is produced by Eric Anderson. Mary Denton Taylor is a co-producer. Elena Beck is our editor. Aaron Hall lent us his spectacular voice to open and close this podcast. I am your host, Jennifer A. Nielsen. You can learn more about me at my website, jennielsen.com. So go out there, find a book by Moses Utomi. You will not regret it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Backstory. If you'd like to enjoy more episodes, visit us at storycon.org/backstory. That's StoryCon.org/backstory.